Dr. Algernon Finch adjusted his spectacles, which were fogged by the desert heat and the confusion of the situation. He scribbled furiously into a reinforced leather-bound notebook, specifically designed for humid environments, circa 1918. The utilization of the shovel remains critically important, albeit deployed alongside a US-made late-model TOW missile. The year was 1983, and Dr. Finch had secured a thoroughly unauthorized and highly dangerous position near the Iraqi defenses. He was not technically an observer, but a distressed historian trying to document a full-scale historical collision. The conflict he was documenting, the Iran-Iraq War, was not a war of its time, but an aesthetic, tactical, and moral mess. It was a perfectly balanced equation of futility sponsored by OPEC and set to a soundtrack of synthesized 1980s pop. An American-made Iranian F-14 Tomcat, a 38 million piece of cutting-edge aerospace engineering, screamed past at Mach 1. Below him, two Iraqi privates were nervously fiddling with a large green canister that smelled of decaying onions. Finch whispered, recognizing the ominous smell instantly that mustard gas was back from the grave, and purely ghoulish. The entire front line was designed to maximize historical dissonance, driven by the terror of their micromanaging dictator. Saddam Hussein had built trenches so elaborate and deep, they were less defensive lines and more subterranean projects. Observe the static defense protocols, as they have achieved depth specifications exceeding those of the Somme battlefield. One could host a discreet, yet highly fortified cocktail party down there, complete with running water and a small aviary. He ducked as a desultory plume of Iranian artillery smoke drifted over, landing a harmless distance away from the trench. It confirmed another key tenet of the conflict, that everyone involved was deeply and profoundly tired of the fighting. To understand how two regional powers spent 8 years ensuring absolutely nothing changed, you had to look at the men. First, there was Saddam Hussein, CEO of Iraq, an operation run less on strategy and more on a revolutionary new technique. In a dimly lit, heavily armored bunker in Baghdad, Saddam was engaged in a weekly review with General Tariq al-Jubouri. General Saddam drawled, adjusting his military cap. "Explain to me again why the Khuzestan campaign took 49 days?" General Tariq swallowed, stating, "The Iranians demonstrated unexpected zealotry, attacking in human waves, ignoring physics." Saddam tapped his desk slowly, stating that zealotry is a failure of effective countermanagement and defense enthusiasm. "Sir, I am paralyzed by fear," Tariq protested, perhaps too honestly, causing Saddam to smile with a chilling, practiced gesture. "If I were to execute your entire battalion for timidity, do you think the next battalion would show more aggressive fire? They would certainly show more initiative in deciding which direction to run." Excellency Tariq replied with hesitation. "Success requires a motivated workforce, and nothing motivates quite like the knowledge that failure leads to death. This fear-driven environment, where inaction led to death and unapproved initiative led to faster death, was the cornerstone. It guaranteed maximum stasis, ensuring Saddam armies would spend years perfectly holding the line, regardless of the cost. On the other side stood Ayatollah Ruhollah Khomeini, whose management style was centered on spiritual validation budget. For Khomeini, the war was not about the waterway or oil rights, but a grand purification ritual requiring human capital. The youth must understand, dying for Allah is infinitely better than living. As a teenager, Khomeini often broadcasted. They were not hampered by expensive things like armor, specialized training, or even realistic expectations of survival. They were equipped with a rifle, a plastic key to paradise, and an overwhelming desire to be spiritually useful in war. It was the classic military mismatch of fear-driven paralysis versus zeal-fueled suicide. A perfect balance for futility. Dr. Finch finally encountered the embodiment of Iraqi fear management in Captain Fawzi, who supervised the sandbag work. Fawzi was a man of fastidious habits and profound anxiety, whose trench system was a masterpiece of civil engineering, Captain Finch said, emerging from a dugout that was not authorized for historical observation. Might I ask about the depth? Fawzi jumped, nearly dropping his clipboard, asking, "Who are you?" and if he was auditing the sandbag placement from Baghdad. Algernon Finch, historian, simply documenting the remarkable return of the siege warfare aesthetic regarding the parapet. It is precisely 1.8 meters high, and the trench is 3.5 meters deep, conforming to Protocol 4A. This ensures maximum deflection capacity against any tactical initiative that might displease His Excellency the leader. Finch nodded, impressed, asking why. When the war started in 1980, and after initial gains, did you stop the momentum? Fawzi looked genuinely terrified, as if the question itself was seditious, and checked over his shoulder for spies. We were ordered to consolidate our gains, as His Excellency was confident of a quick victory, despite the messy fighting. When it proved messy with too much bad publicity, he decreed a temporary organizational halt to the military advance. You mean Saddam ordered the equivalent of robbing a secured bank and stopping to reorganize the kit in the getaway car? We were ordered to dig deep for fear that advancing without signed orders would look like tactical deviation to him. Tactical deviation is indistinguishable from timidity, and for timidity, well, you buy the coffin, Fawzi said, shuddering. Finch watched a group of Iraqi soldiers meticulously smoothing the edges of their trenches with small garden trowels. So you paused, allowing the Iranians 6 months to mobilize zealous volunteers and rearm their Super Cobra helicopters. It allowed us to perfect the trench network, Doctor, as we have a dedicated drainage system. Very important for morale. The Iranian response to this baffling Iraqi pause was swift and confusingly named, setting the tone for land campaigns. Finch was granted rare supervised access to a forward observation post on the Iranian side, where he met Commander Reza. Commander, I note that after Operation Victory failed, your next major effort was designated Operation Undeniable Victory. Is the addition of an adjective standard protocol for failed operations? Finch asked, pointing at the proposed lines. Commander Reza sighed, rubbing his chin, stating, "It is about morale, and we must project confidence to the volunteers. If victory does not work, then perhaps undeniable victory will. Or Operation Absolute Certain Victory for the next quarter." Fascinating, Finch murmured, noting it is military nomenclature as wishful thinking, despite the confusing branding used. By March 1882, the sheer volume of bodies thrown into the breach finally forced the Iraqis back from their defenses. Fueled by zeal, the Iranian human waves pushed the demoralized Iraqi static defenses out of Khuzestan in the conflict. When the Iranians launched Operation Ramadan in July 1982, marching towards Basra, they encountered something Finch knew. He found Hamid, the teenage soldier mentioned in the source material, sitting dazed miles behind the line, with burns. My helmet kept slipping, but we moved fast, and the key to paradise felt heavy but good as we charged, screaming loudly. Then came the smell, like the smell of the deepest pit of forgotten history. Hamid said, wincing as he recalled the gas. The officers called it gas, and it was thick and yellow, and it melted the skin and the conviction right off you. Finch nodded grimly, stating, "Mustard gas and chloropicrin, revived from the Western Front 1915, used against boys here. It is the ultimate tactical insult to the 20th century, with results statistically symmetrical and 20,000 dead."
Look here, Doctor.
The battlefield became a sludge of high-tech shrapnel and World War I chemical residue in a perfect balancing act of the war. The war had achieved a state of chronic stalemate, as it could not end because Khomeini refused peace, as it was a jihad. Iraq could not lose because the entire terrified neighborhood and the geopolitical West stepped in to subsidize Saddam. Finch found himself in a Kuwaiti embassy briefing room, trying to make sense of the financial flowcharts on the wall. Syria, for purely political reasons, closed a critical pipeline, costing Iraq $5 billion a month, which should cripple. Indeed, doctor, a fatal blow, the official replied, wiping sweat from his brow. But Saudi Arabia and Kuwait stepped in. They stepped in with $60 billion in annual subsidies, mostly in non-repayable loans, and free oil shipments for Iraq. Essentially, you were paying Saddam to continue the war he could not afford to fight, Finch asked, tapping the graph. It was necessary life support, doctor, to prevent the contagion of zealotry, the official insisted, clearing his throat. The United States provides satellite imagery of Iranian troop movements, allowing Saddam to position defenses better. So we have F-14s fighting MiGs high above, while below, American spy satellites are directing 1917 trench warfare tactics. This is not history, sir. This is avant-garde political theater, financed by Saudi oil money and American intelligence. The result of this multinational investment was clear in the southern marshlands during the Iranian amphibious attacks. The Iranians, lacking equipment for frontal assaults, tried crossing the treacherous wetlands where Fawzi was deployed. We deployed Protocol 7, Advanced Marshland Denial, Fawzi explained, pointing to a scorched and muddy landscape nearby. The genius was the submerged electrical cables, designed to electrocute anyone standing in the knee-deep water there. You electrocuted 40,000 men in a marsh, which is diabolical, and yet economically effective, I suppose, for you. It saved us money on artillery shells. Doctor and the plan was signed off by 3 separate generals, dispersing risk. Unable to win on the ground, and frustrated by the life support system, Saddam tried a new tactic involving America. He launched the tanker war, targeting Iranian oil shipments, hoping to force the U.S. Navy to close the Strait of Hormuz. This rapidly devolved into a high-stakes game of maritime chicken that resulted in 546 commercial vessels damaged. The absurdity of the maritime conflict is that Saddam targets Iranian shipping to provoke American intervention. Iran retaliates by attacking neutral shipping to punish Iraq. And the international community solution is to escort. This guarantees that both regimes can afford to continue bombing each other assets in the war of the city's escalation. Hamid, now slightly older and serving near Tehran, described the arrival of the Iraqi ballistic missiles called Al-Hussein. They would come at night, inaccurate, and everyone knew they were inaccurate. But they were just heavy and explosive. You did not know where they would land, only that they would land, and the hole would be big and the bodies very small. The Al-Hussein missile, a repurposed Soviet Scud, was the perfect weapon of strategic terror, carrying a heavy warhead. It did not win territory. It just made cities uninhabitable. So Iran responded in kind, buying Scuds from Libya for use. A terrifying duel of vague targeting, with 2 dictatorships throwing incredibly expensive tantrums at populations. Maximum cost, maximum terror, 0 strategic gain. As the pointless perfection continues its balance of futility, the culminating moment of the strategic bankruptcy arrived on Christmas Day 1986 with the Iranian Operation Karbala 5. The Iranians, driven by a dangerous overconfidence, launched a massive 3-pronged offensive to take Basra city. Dr. Finch was close enough to the front to hear the constant pulverizing rumble of the ensuing artillery duel there. They are pouring 200,000 men into a fortified meat grinder. Finch narrated into his recording device amidst explosions. The Iraqis have 300,000 defenders, well-fed, well-equipped, and terrified into perfect tactical stasis by Saddam purges. The battle lasted weeks, and the city of Basra was pulverized, reducing it to smoking rubble, as Fawzi survived it. The trenches held, Dr. Fawzi reported grimly to Finch after the smoke cleared, and we executed every contingency plan. The casualties were immense, but we did not cede an inch as Finch looked at the estimates of 65,000 Iranian casualties. The Great Harvest reaped precisely 65,000 souls, and achieved a net territorial gain of 0 with staggering symmetry. The financial cost, the human cost, the years of bloodshed, all perfectly balanced out to the starting point of the war. The rhetoric of holy war could no longer sustain the reality of military exhaustion, as Iran's economy was collapsing. Finally, in July 1988, under immense pressure, Ayatollah Khomeini accepted UN Resolution 598, calling for a ceasefire. He described the acceptance as like drinking a cup of poison, and the fighting sputtered out by mid-August. Quickly, Dr. Algernon Finch stood on the new and old border demarcation line, a simple patch of dirt in the scorching sun. He dictated his final summary into his recorder, stating 8 years of industrial-scale killing had taken place. High-tech jet fights mingled with 19th century tactics, and over 1 million lives lost and 1.2 trillion spent. International powers involved subsidizing the chaos. And the strategic result is the border has not moved a centimeter. The map looks precisely as it did on September 22, 1980. And we have witnessed, against odds, the pointless perfection. He sighed, packing his World War I-era notebook, as he had documented the ultimate lesson in futility on the safe border. He looked across the demarcation line at Captain Fawzi, who was now supervising the immediate execution of soldiers. They had taken too long to pack up their gear. A final, terrified, bureaucratic purge for the Iraqi army administration. Iraq was the victor in appearance, possessing the world's 4th largest army, battle-hardened and bolstered by the West. But Saddam was also 1.2 trillion in debt to his terrified neighbors, and had learned how to fight attrition. He learned he could fight for 8 years and face 0 consequences from the global community if pointing guns right. Dr. Finch watched a convoy of Iraqi tanks rumble past, heading away from the Iranian border. Clean, recently serviced. He has perfected the art of the perfect stalemate. Finch thought a cold dread washing over him regarding the future. Now he has a massive, expensive military with no enemy left to fight, and a massive debt to repay to the world banks. Finch looked south toward the rich, vulnerable, and comparatively tiny neighbor that had subsidized Saddam's pointless war. The perfection has been achieved, Dr. Algernon Finch whispered, adjusting his spectacles one last time in the desert. Now let us document what happens when the victor decides to collect on the debt 3 years later against Kuwait.